Good evening and welcome to my January 14th, 2025 webinar called Untangling, Pulling Back the Covers. Um, First webinar of 2025 and really excited to be starting this new year. Have some new ideas to share with you tonight and I think they'll be very useful in working with folks in the coming year. Our webinar this month is based again on a new book called Untangling, How You Can Transform What's Impossibly Stuck by Barbara McGavin and Ann Weiser Cornell. And in this webinar, we'll explore how hidden beliefs and attitudes produce conflicts, energetic tangles, I'll call them, and explain what that is. Energetic conflicts that get us stuck and keep us from fulfilling our desires and expressing our creativity and living happy and productive lives. So in this webinar, we'll look at how to find and work with the hidden feelings that keep us locked in unhappy patterns of thinking and behavior. These hidden impressions of experience and reactions to stresses act as if covered by a psychological blanket. Now, most of you, or hopefully a good number of you, are aware that psychologists use words like repressed to describe stresses that cannot be recalled and adequately dealt with. It's kind of a joke among psychologists, I think, that when people are having a conversation, they say, when psychologists are having a conversation, they'll say, "Well, you must have repressed those feelings," and because they do that to their clients. Um, I don't think that comes across funny as it's thinking in my mind. What is covered, pardon me, isn't as inaccessible as one might think. But we need an approach to what lies under the covers. I have this image of myself in bed under the covers, not wanting to come out. And we need an approach that keeps these intense feelings at a manageable level, a level where we feel safe and able to deal with these impressions of experience objectively. So we need to deal with it with objectivity. Now, psychology uses insight and often spends a great deal of time, weeks, months, working at hidden, covered impressions of experience, traumas, stresses. Um, and psychology can't do so much when that insight is lacking, when we don't have a direct awareness of what it is that's keeping us from being happy. But our approach is different. And those of you who've been working with me using this approach are very aware of this. Our approach is different. We use presence, which is being a witness to whatever remains of past experience, a witness, an observer, an impartial observer, if you will, to bring traumatic impressions into awareness in a way that is manageable, that is, by seeing them with objectivity. We don't have to relive traumatic experiences or visit the dark night of the soul. We just need presence, objectivity, and an innocent curiosity about our problems. Now, that's a big sentence. We don't have to relive traumatic experiences or visit the dark night of the soul. A lot of trauma work out there in the world involves our recalling what happened. And it can be very, very painful, very, very difficult, with lots of tears and lots of tissues for people to be able to deal with the things that were overwhelming to them in the past, and which they feel would be overwhelming if brought up in the present, and they often are. And we call the dark night of the soul that episode in life, and it could be more than one, but a dark night of the soul is that episode in life where we get to a point of dire straits, of desperation, of being completely lost and in suffering and in pain. And then we finally get the insight, we finally have an understanding. It's a rough way to go. And it's not merciful as a therapist or as a person who's counseling people and helping people. It's not a merciful way to go. It's a very painful way to go. And while it may be successful, getting there takes a long time and it takes a great deal of anguish. It's almost traumatic to go back and revisit those feelings again. But when we bring presence, our objectivity to it, we bring an impartial observer to find those hurt parts within us and give them the attention that they need in order to be able to release the energy that they hold pent up within us. Now, this idea of holding energy, it actually comes from Freud, and I'm sure there were others, but Freud wrote about it, and he talked about the dynamics of the energy and how you had to work with it in order to free it and liberate it so that it was no longer a binding influence upon us. Um, Most people don't know that about Freud, but if you go back and actually read what he wrote, it's quite fascinating. But I won't go into detail about it. But just the idea that emotions hold energy, and when we have conflicting emotions, then those conflicting values of energy get intermingled, get tied up, and they become very, very painful, but stagnant. They won't move, and they will hold us and hold us and hold us through months and years and decades of life because we don't have access to the source of them. We don't understand where they're coming from. And we have an enormous resistance to a feeling where they're coming from because that was so painful. And that, we fear that pain coming up again. So presence is that ability to be a witness, to say there's something going on and I'm here with it. I can see it. It's like this, it's like that. It's dark, it's gloomy. But I am a witness to that. I have an experience. I have a pain, but I am not the pain. I disidentify with my suffering and remain identified with that aspect of myself, which is the bigger aspect, which is beyond the suffering, which is no longer tied up in the pain of what's happened to us in the past. Now, presence can be developed by a variety of approaches, but the most effortless way to do it is through regular twice daily practice of Maharshi's transcendental meditation and his advanced programs. That brings us transcendental meditation brings us directly to that place of the witness, the self. We write that with a capital S, self, because it's the big self that is beyond all experience. And it just develops naturally because it's there. And every time we meditate, we have some experience of that. And then we bring some of that back into our waking state experience, into our normal activity, our normal thinking. And gradually we get more and more of that. Some people are born with more, some with less. But by practice of transcendental meditation, no matter where we start, we keep building more and more of that ability to be a witness to our experience until eventually that becomes stabilized, which is a remarkable thing. It's a huge accomplishment, so that we are always a witness of our experience and not overshadowed by experience, not caught up and identified with experience, so that we find ourselves paralyzed and unable to fulfill our desires to be creative and productive. Now, there's another way that we can gain access to presence, and that is through the use of language. And in the use of language, we can take the viewpoint of the witness of experience by saying something inside me feels, and then describe what that is. We can even say, and it feels like, and then describe that. And we can just describe it, like an artist, however we see it. It doesn't have to be precise or accurate. It's how we see it. And so something inside me feels. That language helps us to create a space. I've probably every one of you have heard me say this at some time or other. It helps us to create a space between our experience and ourself, so that we can say, I experience something. I think something. I feel something. Who is the I? Now, the language doesn't tell us who the I is, but it gets us into the perspective of viewing our experience from the point of view of that unmovable, transcendental self, capital S self, that self in presence. That's a term that Ann Weiser Cornell, who wrote the book with Barbara McGavin, she uses that phrase a lot, self in presence. And I believe that phrase came from Eugene Gendlin, who founded the approach, which is known as focusing, and that identifies those parts. There's this part in me that thinks this, a part in me that feels that, a part of me that believes something else. They each are binding up the energy of emotion, and they bring that to bear. So, how do I do it when I do it? One of the ways I do it is simply by listening to people, but not like a psychologist. What I'm listening for are those phrases and sentences that reveal where the energy is bound up. Sometimes it's a single word. Somebody may say something like, well, I'm sure I got that from my mother, but that was long ago, and it doesn't matter anymore. And so what you're hearing is a voice that says, this is what is on this is what's holding the energy that's inside of me. It's all tangled up here. And it's tangled because I dismiss it. I don't deal with it. I don't have a tool for working with it. And so I can bring the language in there and recognition. Oh, you have an issue with your mother, and it's related to, and I can help them find what that is. And you're here with that. I'm pausing there to let that just move in, for us each individually to move into that space. And I'm here with that, whatever that thing is. It's always safe to use mother as an example. Psychologists will tell you. And I'm here with that. And then you can bring something more to it, and that's curiosity. Curiosity, what is it about that? Is there something that I'm supposed to know? Is there something that it wants to tell me? Is it trying to protect me? Is it trying to keep me safe? When we start talking about those things, we move into an area that I think is particularly interesting and that which I've not actually heard other people talk about in this way that we're talking about developing presence and bringing presence to bear. But we can get, I'll call it wise, knowledgeable about where to look for emotions that are hidden from view. Because after all, we don't recognize them. It may be that we give expression to them, but we don't recognize them. And we look for parts of us. They're called um, archetypes. We look for archetypes within us. And there are four principal archetypes that everybody has and which are expressed to varying degrees. And then everybody has other archetypes as well. But these four archetypes are ones we always have to consider. The first one is the child. I'll name them and then I'll go through them individually. So it's the child, the victim, the prostitute, and the saboteur. Now, just using those words probably isn't very helpful. So let me explain what they mean. So within us, there is an inner child. And that child may be of the very positive sort, the exuberant, the happy, the playful, the delightful child that laughs and runs around and has a really good time. But that child may also show some of the other qualities of childhood: dependence, vulnerability, a sense of helplessness, feeling unheard and unseen, feeling insignificant. And it can also be wounded, abandoned. It can be a free range child, which means it's not abandoned exactly, but it's kind of left on its own. It just has to take care of itself. And an eternal child, one that never grows up. So that's the child. So there we could say, oh, there's something inside me, and it's a child, and it's feeling very vulnerable. And I see it as being curled up in a little ball and kind of shivering or whimpering. And then we can check in with that part and say, well, I'm here with you, and I'm just going to sit with you and keep you company and keep you safe, because that's, after all, what it needs. And then you can ask it, what more do you need? And it may start telling you a story about itself, where it came from, or why it's feeling the way it is. Or maybe it just needs your attention. It can be there in silence, just being present with it. I discovered this about children so long ago. Um, I was taking care of a child. It was kind of babysitting, I guess you could say, but it wasn't a baby. It was a grade schooler. And there was a soccer game, and it was playing in the soccer game. And I turned away, and then somebody called me. Oh, the child has gotten hurt. And what happened was they collided with another kid, and my kid, if as I'll call it that, wasn't my own child, but the one I was caring for, had fallen down, and she just lay there in a pile. She just, you know, and she was crying, and so I just went over, and I didn't say anything. I just picked her up to get her off the field so the game could go on. I just picked her up and carried her off, and I just held her. And I stood over at the sidelines and just held her for a while. And then finally she settled down, and then in just a short time, a very short time, just wiggled loose and ran back out on the field. And everything was okay. And I was just struck by all the child needed was my presence, physical presence in that case, just to be there. It was more than physical, of course. It was, the quality of caring for the kid, to overcome that sense of vulnerability and hurt and feeling unseen and unheard. And it was all taken care of. It just by holding her for a little while, not very long, just a couple of minutes, and then it was over. And she was back in the game. So that's the child. Let me talk about the victim for a minute. Um, Victim is what it sounds like. It's pretty easy to figure out what that means. And a victim is hurt, doubtful, fearful, expecting the worst, pitiful, envious. Um, and again, a victim, we can play the role of a victim. We can wear that coat, if you will. And so again, bringing presence to that victim lets the victim kind of go, oh, I'm okay. I'm not really hurt. I mean, I've been hurt, but I'm not hurt now. And I don't need to expect that I'm going to be hurt again. It could happen, but that, so they develop some space in which they're able to let go of the energy that's wrapped up in victimhood. And the next one is prostitute. Prostitute is submissive, conforming, not recognizing their needs. So they give up their power, they give up their autonomy. They sell themselves in one way or another. And it's a thing that women are often taught to do, to be a prostitute, to just give themselves up. You'll take care of me and I'll keep you happy. So the prostitute is a very common one. And then lastly is the saboteur. The saboteur is the voice inside. This one really lends itself to this. Something inside me is telling me that I'm incapable, not good enough, smart enough, or talented enough. And it sells out or gives oneself away like a prostitute. But it doesn't follow through. The saboteur goes, you can't do that. It's not going to work. You're going to fail. And that's a very, very common voice, that voice that really is putting oneself down, lacking self-esteem. Let's see if that helps. Yeah, a little bit. So those four archetypes, the child, the victim, the prostitute, the saboteur, we can almost always find a part. So when we don't know where to look, we can just ask, am I being a child? Am I playing the role of a victim? Am I prostituting myself? Am I sabotaging myself? Almost certainly yes. But you may not see it. And so then you can say, oh, we can pull back the covers on that. Something inside me feels like a saboteur. It says I'm telling me I'm not good enough. I'm going to fail. And I'm here with that. Again, the language helps us to be a witness to the experience. It helps us to stay in presence with our experience. And then maybe we sit down with that part. Maybe we just hold it, like I gave the example of holding the child. Maybe we just hold it. It's just an image we create, but it creates a way of the energy that's tied up in the saboteur or in the prostitute or the victim or the child. It gives it a way of releasing so that the tangle of energy untangles. So when I'm working with people, I often hear them say, give expression to their tangles, their parts that are wrapped up in conflict with one another. And I swear I have examples of people who can get four different parts in a single sentence. They just keep changing them. They keep qualifying what they say. Well, I'd like to do this, but I doubt if I can do that. And I'm afraid of hurting somebody. And I'm concerned about somebody else's judgment about me, and all it's what I'm hearing are, all the different components of these. You can hear them as archetypes. You can just hear them as as expressions, and there they are. And then I have to help people tease those things apart and identify them and be witness to them so that they can transform. Now, one of the things that I do, which not everybody does in this field, hardly anybody, is to identify in people both the emotions that they're feeling without them telling me, just on the subtle level, just pick up the energy of that. It's like saying, well, so I can tell somebody's nervous, and I can tell that they're frightened about, some kind of thing, not usually the specific thing, but the kind of thing. Um, so I can pick up on that kind of energy, but I can also just pick up on the energy itself and work with that energy. And I have a myriad of tools for working with that energy so that I can help it transform. And so for some people, I'll be working on something, particularly if it's a past life thing, and I'll just go back and I'll pick up what the emotions, what the feelings were, and untangle them and just work directly with the energy of that and free that. And it's funny, I say that, like it's a very simple thing, because from my point of view, it actually is. Um, but every once in a while, like when I'm talking about it like I am now, and I realize that's really kind of remarkable, actually. So he says, patting himself on the back a little bit. It's cool to be able to do that kind of work and to help people to rapidly transform. So unlike psychology, where you may spend months or years or even decades working with a tangle, in my work, usually 3 to 6 sessions is enough, sometimes a little bit more. And of course, if there's an actual health concern, that may take more. It may take more work, because we gotta get the physical body back into a normal, healthy state. But that's the kind of work that I do. And it looks like I took exactly half an hour, which is what I intended to take. So I'm going to stop there and see in the chat, if you'll put in a chat, and when you type in, when you go to type there in the little space, you can select either host and panelists or everyone. And if you'll select everyone, then everyone will see. If you really feel you want to keep it private, go ahead and just put it to hosts and panelists. I'm the only panelist. Nobody else will see it but me. And so I'll give you just a moment to do that. In the meantime, I am planning a webinar for February 11th, and I think I'm going to do a third one on untangling and do more on what tangles look like. There were 6 forms of those that McGavin and I'm blanking on her name, which I use all the time. Cornell, Ann Weiser Cornell, and Barbara McGavin. They identified 6 ways in which, or forms in which tangles show up. And somebody had asked me if I would talk about those more, and I didn't get to that tonight, so maybe we'll do that then. And for those of you who paid to attend this session, almost everyone, um, you can get a discount on a 3-session program if you sign up by January 31st, but you have to request the special PayPal connection. There's a URL to be able to do that, and I can send that to you. So February 11th will be the next webinar. I don't see anything in the messages, in the chat rather, or anywhere else. So I'm going to end the recording, and then we will move on into the group clearing session.